that we see that might be of relevance to the coffee sector. And this is really the result of a growing increase in the type of supply chain regulation that we see both in Europe, but also in North America and increasingly in other consuming regions. So I'll say this again at the end, but it's really not an isolated phenomena, and we really need to make sure that we are thinking about how to change sectoral practices in line with this. And these types of supply chain legislations range from just disclosing what sort of sustainability issues we're doing to all the way to like trade restrictions, right? And I guess the EU deforestation regulation really is a type of trade restriction as it regulates entry to the European market. And so yes, well, I'll talk today about the deforestation-free products regulation, give a very brief insight on connected developments, and also talk about implications of the sector. And I apologize in advance, my slides have a lot of text. I will share them afterwards though, because there is a lot of detail that is useful, but you don't have to try to read all of it at the same time as I'm speaking. So just to put us back into sort of the context, in a supply chain of, for instance, coffee that reaches all the way from the farmer to the consumer goods manufacturer and thereafter the consumer, there's two types of due diligence legislations that we have seen now emerge. On the one hand is the one that is focus that really focuses on how has this particular good been produced, and in particular, how is it related to deforestation? Or there's also regulations that focus on the company in question and that asks them to regulate all of their supply chains and understand all of the risks, environmental and social risks within their supply chains. And so the deforestation regulation is the former. And so it regulates all imports of coffee that come into the European market, as well as any product that is being moved by between different actors within the European market or exported, although that wouldn't, So anything that's imported into the market, moved within the market or exported, and asks the handlers of this product to know what's happening with regard to its deforestation risk. Whereas other types of due diligence legislations that I'll also talk about really ask companies sitting in the European Union or in particular countries that have due diligence legislations to have a much wider knowledge of their supply chains and to do their own due diligence on a variety of risks, which can range from child labor to forced labor to human rights issues and also environmental concerns, and mitigate those risks as best possible. So turning to the deforestation-free products regulation, the title has changed over the course of its development. But what we know now is that it regulates any type of deforestation, including the type of deforestation that would be legal according to producing country laws. So it uses the FAO definition of a forest and asks that on areas that where forest was cleared after the end of December 2020, products that are produced on those types of areas are not allowed to be imported into the European market. And so this means that we need to prove for any shipment that comes in that it is coming from areas that have not been cleared, right, after the end of December 2020. In addition, it also regulates that there's no impact on forest degradation, as well as that there was compliance with local laws. It regulates operators that are handling products, these deforestation risk products, which include coffee, and again, who place it, make available, or export the products. It also applies to derived products. I guess in coffee, this is less relevant, but like roasted coffee would be a derived product, but also, for instance, chocolate or furniture. And for the purposes of today's session, I think what is really important is the requirements in terms of traceability, which are that there is traceability down to the plot level. So in order to comply with the legislation, the operators, the organizations importing or moving the product will need to know all geolocations of all plots of land where the relevant commodity was produced, as well as the date or time range of the production. if the producing plot is larger than 4 hectares, a single geospatial, a GPS point won't be sufficient. We'll need to submit polygons, as well as conclusive and verifiable information that the relevant products are deforestation-free and legal. And so here the company really has the onus to have done its own due diligence again and know that both the types of information provided by whichever their supplier is accurate, but also that the deforestation risk has been reduced. And what the EU has announced that they will do is that they will use this type of geospatial information and do checks of those, overlay them onto satellite imagery to check whether the particular plots that were identified as being the coffee growing area had been deforested after the cutoff date. We also have this classification of origins into low, medium, or like normal and high risk. But this type of geolocation needs to be done for all origins, irrespective of how high the risk it is. What changes in terms of the risk level is the amount of work operators will need to do to show that they have mitigated potential deforestation risk, as well as the frequency of checks that the EU regulators will do on products imported from these origins. What happens if you don't comply? It's still not super well. What is clear is the range of potential penalties, which include fines, the confiscation of the relevant commodities at import, the confiscation of revenues of companies, as well as the exclusion from public procurement processes. So there's quite a strong range of enforcement measures possible. And so the text is currently undergoing the final legal review, but is most likely not going to change substantially anymore. It is expected that it is adopted. Actually, I think in the Parliament, it's already in April, and then the final adoption will happen by June and July. And the implementation, it will enter into effect immediately, but the implementation is staggered alongside the categorization of the different origins in terms of risk, which will be within 18 months of its adoption. So what we can expect is that at the end of 2024, more or less, this will be implemented and operators will be bound by these new rules. So I just wanted to give a little bit of framing, right? This is not the only type of legislation that focuses on deforestation risk. We also have legislation in the UK that has already been passed. This focuses also on coffee, but on illegal deforestation. So deforestation that is illegal in the country of origin is not as encompassing as what is happening in the EU, but nonetheless is also a step into that same area. What we also have on the docket is the US Forest Act. It's not yet adopted, it's only being proposed. And the last version that has been proposed didn't have coffee included as a deforestation risk commodity. However, it was not sort of discussed the last time. And so the plan is to reintroduce this bill, but by the same proponents in the first half of 2023. And what we know is that they say the EU deforestation regulation did provide wind in its sails, that it might also be adopted because now there is an equivalent regulation in the EU. So who knows whether they'll expand their definition of forest risk commodity then. However, this is also only focused on illegal deforestation. So the EU goes furthest. The EU also goes furthest in other types of legislation. So I just want to highlight this very briefly so we don't get this like deforestation tunnel vision, because we simultaneously have the rise of these wider due diligence rules that are really asking companies that have global supply chains to understand their human rights risks. There's a number of policies in Norway, Switzerland, and the Netherlands focused on child labor, which may be a concern to the coffee community, and also a much more broad EU level human rights due diligence legislation that will likely be discussed over the coming years. So what are the implications for the coffee market? As was said earlier, while coffee is not a key deforestation driver, it might become so in the future. And in any case, it is now included in this measure. So we'll need to adapt to it. There is also concerns over a number of these single issue legislations, right? Like forced labor, child labor issues that we know are unfortunately a reality in some areas and some coffee producing countries. The deforestation legislation goes furthest in really asking for this plot level traceability. So it may require a fundamental reshaping of supply chains. It may also, if we're not careful, lead to supply chain exclusion of certain origins or certain producers where the supply chain is too messy to really trace it down, right? And in general, companies as well as roasters are likely to be asked to have much more detailed knowledge about their supply chains and to provide this credible information. And I just want to highlight that this, of course, while the legislation is focused on the companies importing, it has especially impacts also for small producers, as well as cooperatives who may be asked for much more clear traceability and information systems on the ground, where there might be now a lot more discussion about really sensitive topics, such as the remuneration of farm workers or child labor, but who may also be empowered, especially if they have been negatively affected by companies and their supply chains who are based in the European Union, because especially with these due diligence legislations, right, there's the expectation that there's higher accountability for harms done. And I really look forward to the rest of the sessions to see how we can do specifically traceability in the best practice way to make sure that we're not excluding small producers in the future. So thank you very much, and I'll stop sharing now.